I think that being naked really was the great equalizer. It's something that puts us all on more of an even playing field. And, I even see it like when I talk to people and they go, oh, naked yoga, I could never do that. And I see them going within themselves going, who am I without my clothes?
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah family. Welcome back to the show. We are picking up today our conversation with Yogi Aaron. We're talking all about nude yoga. And this practice of naked yoga is much, much deeper than you may think. It's something that I have been so interested in for so long. So I was so glad when Aaron agreed to come on the show. If you missed Tuesday's episode, definitely listen to it because it is a fascinating story. Aaron is the author of Autobiography of a Naked Yogi, and he shares with us this journey of how he pioneered the practice of naked yoga for men in the early 2000s in New York City, and how he developed and grew this practice from a small experimental class to a large studio offering over 15 nude yoga classes a week. We talk about stripping away clothing as a way to access the deepest layers of ourselves. Whether you think you might ever want to take your clothes off in yoga or not, this podcast is full of gems that are going to make you curious about getting out of your comfort zone, maybe exploring partner yoga, and who knows, maybe even taking your clothes off as well. Let's dive back into our conversation with Aaron. Walk me through a typical class. Like in the early days. So I know you mentioned people leave their clothing at the door and they come in, and you mentioned having studied with Brian Kess. So I'm imagining there was some sort of power flow or heating flow to get people sweaty as a first step. Is that correct? Was the room heated at all?
So for just a disclosure statement or disclaimer, the way I teach now is nothing the way I used to teach.
Yes, and we're going to hear about how you transitioned too, a little bit away from this practice. But talk about back then first.
So, yeah, I mean, I kind of went from Brian Kess to Ashtanga. So Brian Kess was my first teacher. David Swenson was my second teacher. And I'm trying to remember now, there's another teacher of mine. His name just escaped me, and that's horrible. But I would teach the first year and almost 2 years. So the class was always 2 hours. And so and it always actually, some nights it went into 3 hours. But the first half of the class, so about the first hour and 15 minutes would be like a power flow sequence. And I used to play a lot of music back then. So I used to choreograph like these great, sequences. And it was great because, the guys loved it. I mean, a lot of the guys that came were already doing like power flow kind of yoga classes or fitness style yoga classes. And then we would stop the class. So I would finish the sequence, and usually about 1 hour and 15 minutes in. And I would stop and I would say, okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break. And this is a chance for you to go and meet 5 people you didn't know before. So I would encourage them to go around and would have people go around and talk. And then I would say, okay, find a partner. And so for the next hour and 15 minutes, I would continue on then with like doing partner yoga. So I would have a power quote unquote flow sequence, and then I would have a partner sequence. And then we would always end the classes in partner shavasana.
Ooh, well, okay. Well, I want to hear what that entails in just a minute. But before we talk about partner shavasana, though, did you find a difference in doing these power flow, vinyasa flow, ashtanga, whatever we want to call it, naked? Like I heard, I don't know, but I've heard that, when you're naked, all of a sudden, sometimes like poses that are inaccessible to you, or for example, things like binds or arm balances where often you're like slipping on your clothes or stuff isn't really working. All of a sudden you strip the clothes off and things are just working a lot better. You're getting into deeper holds. You're getting into those binds that you couldn't access before. Is that true?
I think that clothes get in the way. I really do. I mean, right from when I used to joke about, let's get naked in those early days with my mixed groups, with my co-ed groups, I would notice like how much clothes would get in the way. So how much of that is a reason to practice naked yoga? I don't know. But what I can tell you is, especially in those early days, there was such a sense or a feeling of empowerment. I mean, watching these guys, and you could literally feel people feeling empowered. And I don't think it necessarily came from just the nakedness. I think it came from everything. I think it came from the sense of, we're doing this together. We're in this together. We're enjoying this moment together. If that makes any sense to you. I don't know if I've articulated it well enough.
Yeah, no, I think if you want to do naked yoga, it shouldn't just be because you want to be able to, bind your side angle pose or something. It's like that could be a side effect, but this is about, stepping into your body in a new, authentic, empowering, healing way. So it was half a flow that you're familiar with, half partner yoga. And then what is partner shavasana? Because you can't throw a term out there like that and then not describe for us what that is.
Well, you haven't even asked me what partner Baddha Konasana is. Yet, but
oh my goodness.
That's another podcast. So no, partner shavasana, there's a few ways to do partner shavasana. But one of them, the most simplest way is that you kind of lie head to toe and your inner arm would then sort of line up with your partner's inner arm. And so you're connected throughout the whole shavasana, if you can imagine that.
Sounds so lovely and intimate, really intimate.
Yes, intimate. I mean, we broke all the boundaries of intimacy.
And I think it's interesting because you talked a little bit earlier about this difference between sensuality and sexuality, but in all this partner work, did for the most part it stay in this zone of sensuality, or did things ever get sexual?
No, I mean, I'm very good at holding space. So when I say something is a certain way, people tend to listen in my yoga classes. And one of the things that we were very clear on is that, and we would always let people know before they came to a class, that there would be a lot of sensual touch. And sensual touch is basically just touch. I mean, it's me putting my hand on your heart, or putting my hand on your shoulders, or our palms coming together to make partner namaste mudra. So there's all kinds of, we encourage touch. Touch was a huge part of it, but where the line was sexual touch. So sexual touch was never allowed. So obviously then sexual touch would be anytime where we're putting our hands on our partner's genitals, or, in an inappropriate place. Or if your partner didn't want to be touched, that would also be inappropriate as well. The space that we held for people to be in was very clear. And I always, and my teachers always gave very clear instructions on where to put your hands and where not to put, not really so much not where to put your hands, but we always gave people very clear instructions on what to do. So they weren't like left wondering, okay, what do I do next? And what I also noticed is that people were very respectful to each other. And I never really saw anybody being disrespectful. What I did find, which was interesting, is that a lot of people sadly don't know how to touch each other. You would say something like, put your hands on your partner's shoulders and then feel a sense of energy building around the shoulders and neck, and then kind of very slowly drag that energy down your partner's arms to their hand. And you would see sometimes with some people who are not so familiar with touch, some very different interpretations that were not very probably pleasant for the person receiving that. And so what I found was that my role started to become like this educator, like, how do we touch each other? What is sensual touch? What is healing touch? What is loving touch? And so these were things that I began to explore over the next 10, 12 years.
Were people having emotional releases in the class? Were there tears, emotions coming up?
A lot, especially, I mean, as I said, I started teaching in 2001. So my very first class was March 18th, 2001. And of course, you know that 9/11 happened shortly after that. And for really the next couple of years after that, there was a lot of emotions that were brought up, depending on the kind of class that I would teach and depending on what I was doing. But especially in those earlier days, there was a lot of breakthroughs for a lot of people. Because a lot of us have this idea that to be naked is to be sexual and nothing more could be perverted. You know, we are born naked, we die naked. I mean, that's just a fact. And, you know, and somewhere along the way, we've you know, become associated with this idea of, okay, we only get naked if we're having sex. And, we forget like being naked is a natural state and it's a beautiful place to meet someone, just to meet someone and it can be very soulful.
I love that. What was the sort of instruction you gave to folks if their partner started crying or started having an emotion come out? How did you hold space, again, for so many people and so many partners? Were they supposed to comfort the person or just sit and wait? Like what did you tell people to do?
I would say that the emotional releases, either one of two things happen. One is that if there was an emotional release when people were partnering, oftentimes I didn't know about it until either towards the end of a release or at the end of class. And because the person would tell me, or they would write me an email. And what I found is like a lot of times when that happened, the partner that was with them would be very comforting and nurturing. You know, my therapist used to always say, like, the deepest thing that we all desire is to be seen. And I feel like when people need to be seen, that other people kind of show up for them. And that's what I noticed time and time again. Another thing that would happen is people would have a release, and it would usually be during Shavasana or a moment when we were, you know, back and by ourselves. And I always had assistants. So a lot of times the assistants would be going around the room and checking on people or just being there for people if they needed, you know, that space to be held.
So you just mentioned assistants, and I've heard over the course of our interview, you've talked about how this has grown. I mean, it grew. So were you training teachers? Were you writing books? I mean, how did this evolve? And then I know it evolved to a point where you sort of began to shift direction. So can you talk to us about that now?
Oh, Lord. It's like, you just asked like 8 years worth of questions.
Give me 3 sentences. No, it's okay. Did you train other teachers?
Yeah, I started my own teacher training. It was obviously very specialized, and the goal was to teach people cover my yoga classes. So that's really why I did that. I found it really difficult to bring in outside teachers. I found that the best teachers we had, and we had a lot of teachers, and I did eventually have to start having outside teachers join us. But I found always the best teachers were the teachers that were part of the community and people who had studied with me, and they knew sort of what I wanted because they had been there themselves. And so they had that experience. That's not to say I wasn't trying to teach and never wanted to teach clones. I just wanted to teach people how to do good sequencing and then how to lead the classes in a good, wholesome way. And I started to grow. I mean, I had a studio. I found a studio space in 2004 that became my studio space. And that was when I really started to have a lot of classes. And then when I lost that space, I moved, ironically, to 23rd Street and 6th Avenue again, where I came up with the original idea. And I actually got a studio, like a real like above ground yoga space. Because up until that point, you know, Hot Nude Yoga was really underground. And at that moment, we started to move above ground.
And at that point, at the peak, was it like there's several classes a day?
We went up to 15 classes a week. I think that's where we maxed out at one point.
All nude.
All naked.
And all for men.
Yes.
And just so people listening, I mean, Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are all women, all female nude classes, right?
I don't know. I honestly don't know what's happening out in the world of naked yoga anymore.
So I think there are, because the friend that I had talked to, he mentioned that where he worked in the United Kingdom, there were men's classes, women's classes, and co-ed classes. So if you're a woman listening to this, I mean, I do think you can find this with a girl tribe, basically. I'm sure that exists.
Or start your own.
So the studio's doing well and it's at its peak. What then shifted? Because obviously you're no longer in New York, you're now in Costa Rica. So I'm guessing some big shifts happened.
Well, I mean, it's kind of a loaded question because there's a lot of things that shifted for me. As much as I loved, and I still miss it, I miss my community. Once in a while I go to New York and I have a couple of friends that lead or have still kind of run the group, so to speak. It's under a new name, a different name. But they asked me to teach, and I go and teach, a class, and I do something for them. And I go back there and I just miss it so much. I miss the community. There's the community aspect, hands down. It's just so warm and so nurturing. I miss that a lot. I miss my male tribe. But I started to shift, and there's a lot of things that shifted for me. One is I was tired of New York. I knew that I love my time in New York. I would never say anything bad about New York, never. But, and I just felt like, I knew this wasn't the place I was going to be for, the rest of my life. And I was really craving to create like a community, like a retreat center or an ashram. And so my journey kind of brought me to Costa Rica, and that is what led me to opening up Blue Osa Yoga Retreat and Spa. I wanted to create a space that was yogic centric and that I could really, hold space for other people to experience yoga. And my business partner and I really thought about the idea of, doing more naked yoga and having naked yoga groups there and then, just having other gay groups come. And what we realized very quickly in the early days was that wasn't a good idea for a lot of reasons. And the idea started to morph into what Blue Osa is today. Very quickly it morphed into what we're doing today. I kind of felt like, I think the greatest thing a person can do in their life is create something and then walk away from it. Create something to the point where it's so successful and then just go do something else. And that's what I did with Hot Nude Yoga. The big year, 2009 and even 2010 were, 2 huge years of success and sort of the culmination of everything that I had worked towards. And I left it knowing I did the best job I possibly could. And it gave me such pleasure and such delight to see, maybe not hundreds, but a lot of people around the world starting to pick up that mantle and starting, to do their own things.
So big question. Do you right now, as your personal practice close on or close off?
It depends, but it can be a little bit of both sometimes. It depends on where I am. Having a yoga retreat center does not afford one a lot of the luxury of privacy.
Well, it's just so interesting because I feel like having got to talk to you and got to know you better, it's not so much just like it's fun to practice asana with your clothes off. So, I mean, in the privacy of your room, it's like really about this sense of community, like what you kept telling us about. So that's the biggest piece. That's the reason why you'd strip down.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what other people would say or type in, but in my book, Autobiography of a Naked Yogi, I talk a lot about what came out of this experience was community. I mean, anybody that you talk to that was my student during, or part of my group during those years will tell you for them it was about the community. It's the first word that will generally come out of their mouth is the sense of community. And I think that being naked really was the great equalizer. It's something that puts us all on more of an even playing field. And, I even see it like when I talk to people and they go, oh, naked yoga, I could never do that. And I see them going within themselves going, who am I without my clothes? And yeah, the community aspect of it, hands down, was really the driver for it.
Aaron, before we let you go, you just mentioned your book, and I was about to ask you about it. Autobiography of a Naked Yogi. Listeners, if you're interested and want to get more information on that, I'm assuming, like the title states, it's talking a lot about going deeper into some of the things we've touched on in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I talked a lot about hot nude yoga and what happened there. And then how that led me to the Himalayas, which led me to facing one of the most challenging things of my life, which then led me to Costa Rica. And I wrote it in a very kind of cool way. It's got a very chicken soup for the soul kind of feel to it, so that I broke up all the points along my life in like small bite-sized chapters. So you don't have to feel like you have to read the whole book quickly. You can just like read a little bit every night.
That's lovely. And the other kind of big last question I wanted to ask you was just because so many of our Savannah listeners, they do have a deep spiritual practice and they're interested in, going into the deepest layers of who they are. And I'm just wondering if you think taking off your clothes has a real value for folks, regardless if they're male or female, regardless of whether they want to do it in their home or in a community. Like, how can this be something that people or listeners play with or integrate some of these ideas we've like danced on, into their daily life right now?
Well, I'm the first place. I mean, oh God, I'm sorry. I just had like 5 answers pop out of my mouth. The first thing to understand is yoga practice is synonymous with the word called experimentation. And this doesn't get taught enough. Like, to practice is to experiment. And I would encourage people to create experiments that push them outside any box that they live in. And so if you think that being naked is uncomfortable, then strip down your clothes right now. Don't even wait.
Do it right now.
Do it right now. The second thing I would suggest is to get a partner yoga book. Look for one that is inspiring, one that's not so challenging. Some of these partner yoga books are a little crazy, but find one that's, has something worthwhile to say, easily applicable in your life, and do what I did and grab a friend, and commit to just breathing. Because sometimes when people do partner yoga, they become chatty Cathys. And, part of the tapas of a yoga experience is just be quiet and listen to breaths. And it's so potent. Oh my God. When you start listening to another person's breath, everything changes. Your life will never be the same after that. It's amazing what happens when you can start to really sink into a posture with another person. And then do that. And then maybe do it again. Do exactly the same poses, but do it naked with that person the next time. And see how it feels and see what comes up and watch your inner reaction. It's such a potent thing to do. I remember one of my students quoted me one time in a documentary video, and he said that I said, it's about you watching yourself, watch yourself. Become the witness of yourself, and so just tune out everything, listen to breath, and go back to watching yourself. Tune into breath, watch yourself, and watch what comes up. And it's fascinating. And I think that if people do that, they will start to have a very deep and profound experience.
I love that advice. And it's so different. Do you agree, Aaron? Because I know I've gone to some acro yoga classes, and it has that really cool sense of community that you talked about, but it's very almost like analytical, like in your head, because it's like you're trying to figure out how to do all these complex moves. And then, I don't know, there's a little bit of self-consciousness, I think, that creeps in because, again, you're trying to do these complex, often, challenging postures. So if you're new, and I love this idea of what you're saying is just sit with a partner and breathe. It doesn't have to be acrobatics.
I mean, one of my favorite postures, which was interesting because I used to do this all the time as a chakra practice, is sitting naked, and you can do it clothed as well, with your partner and back to back. So you're actually not even looking at each other. You're just sitting so that your spine is with your partner's spine. And my teacher, Alan Finger, one day did this in his class, and I was like, oh, I've been already doing this, and this is a sacred tantric practice. And then he's doing, and he had everybody sitting back to back, and then had everybody meditating on their partner's chakras. I mean, talk about going deep, and just sitting back to back doing that. That's a simple partner practice.
I love that. That is so beautiful. And I love Alan too. I studied with him as well. So we have a teacher in common. That's very cool. Aaron, it's been so fun to connect with you. How can the listeners stay in touch? Obviously, they can get your book, Autobiography of a Naked Yogi, and they can come and actually be with you. Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit more about your retreat center in Costa Rica, Blue Osa?
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you. The best way to connect with me is through yogiaaron.com. And that's just Yogi Aaron, YOGIAARON.com. And on there, I have a blog. I have a very dynamic blog, so people can, sign up for that if they want to. And today, actually, I just opened an article called The 10 Signs that You Have Reached Enlightenment. Ironically, one of them is not getting naked, so don't worry. But I offer yoga teacher training, 1-month immersions. Earlier, I was talking about people through an experience. So one of my greatest passions is leading yoga teacher trainings here at Blue Osa. And we have 2 offerings. We have one that's 1 month and then one that's 14 days. And the 1-month immersions are really transforming. If you have any question about who you are, your place in the world, what path you're supposed to be on, this is the program that answers a lot of those questions and gets you back on track in your life and helping you to release those things that aren't working for you. That's what gets me excited is sharing that with people and then also having them go through that experience. And then, of course, we talked about my book, Autobiography of a Naked Yogi. It's a great read. Even I enjoy reading it. So it's a great read.
That says a lot, especially if you spent so much time, I'm sure, writing and editing it. So I'm going to put all those links for the listeners down below. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Costa Rica. Savannah family, let me know what you thought of this week's episode. Did you learn something new? Do you feel differently about the idea of stripping off your clothes and practicing naked, whether at home or in a group? I would love to hear from you. Remember, you can post your comments, questions, and ideas at savannahspirit.com/group. That's going to redirect you to our private Facebook group where I can approve you as a member. And remember that the number one way to support the show here is by leaving a rating or review here on iTunes. And if you're not sure how to do that, because I know it's complicated, you can go to savannahspirit.com/review for a quick step-by-step tutorial on how you can leave a review here on iTunes, even if iTunes isn't how you normally listen to the show. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a beautiful day and maybe even take your clothes off. So much love from my heart to yours. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/SavannahSpirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode. And thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.